So I am delighted to introduce Claire McBeth to our podcast. She is 52, married with 2 grown-up children, and she is a carer. Lovely to see you, Claire, and thank you so much for joining me. So my first question that I ask anyone on the podcast is, tell me a challenge you are facing or have had to overcome.
My challenge really was in 2003. My son was involved in a very serious road traffic accident. He was knocked over, and so the challenge has been coming to terms with having a profoundly disabled child, and going through into adulthood and what that means to us as a family.
I'm so sorry, Claire. I mean, I just can't imagine what that is like, from having a really healthy young boy who's sort of fully able, to someone now who is profoundly disabled. It's like you have to grieve the son you had and come to terms and come to what's the word? So you have to grieve the son that you had and learn how to live and love with the son that you have. Not that you've ever stopped loving him. I'm going to do that again. So you have to grieve the son you had and learn how to come to terms with the son that you now have. And it sounds like his profound disabilities change every aspect of your life.
Yeah, for us it was, he went out to school on a normal day. I was expecting him in, as normal from school. He used to go to a school outside the area, so he used to get a bus, and was expecting him in. He was going to be cooking tea that night for my daughter. Him and my daughter were going to make a pizza together, and I got a phone call from someone who was at the accident scene and just said, Christopher's mum, he's been knocked over. And I didn't know what the extent of the injury was going to be. In my head, it was just going to be a broken arm or a broken leg, or, a few bumps and bruises. So I sort of flew around there in my dad's car. Luckily, I had my dad's car because my mum and dad were on holiday at the time. And we went round, and I went round on my own. And I arrived sort of the same time as the ambulance, actually. And it was quite miraculous. There was a doctor there that had just been on call. She'd been out on calls and was just returning back to the surgery. She actually looked after me. She'd obviously been looking after Chris until the ambulance arrived. And then she sort of gently moved me away and was speaking to me very calmly whilst they were getting Chris ready to go into the ambulance. And from that point, he never spoke again. I've never heard his voice again. He's not spoken to me. And that's one of the big things that I find really difficult, is that, it's like when you do have a grief, when you have a loss where someone's actually died, that's one of the things that I know from experience. You sort of start thinking, do I remember their voice? And he couldn't speak to me. And that was one of the hardest things for us to come to terms with, is that loss of like his ability to be able to communicate what he wanted. So we were put in a position where we had to make decisions.
I mean, I can just sort of feel the shock in my body of never hearing your child's voice again. And it isn't because they've died, but because they've been so profoundly injured, and that you're left in the position of having to guess. And when I've worked with other people who've had similar devastating circumstances as you, it's almost, what I've learned from them is they almost grow a kind of third brain where you become Chris, but it's very all-encompassing, because you're constantly trying to read his face, his eyes, his movements. Is he in pain? Is he bored? Does he feel lonely? Is he cold? And you're kind of making up the answers. And because you don't have him to tell you, you're constantly guessing, I guess.
Yeah, it's like in the early days, like initially he was in hospital for he was in a coma. It was an induced coma, And so apart from he had a small fracture on his leg, you wouldn't know that he'd had an injury. He just looked, and one thing that I sort of wanted to put in that I remember right from the very beginning, my husband turned up with my in-laws, and we were put into a side room, a family room. And I can remember just looking at my husband and just saying to him, no matter what happens, we have to keep communicating. We just have to keep talking, because
to him,
you know, and to each other, we have to be able to communicate, because I knew that whatever was going to be the outcome, this is going to have a massive impact on all of us. So he was in hospital for 7 months.
Gosh.
And like, you know,
in intensive care.
It was in intensive care for a month, and we went through some really dark periods where initially they just didn't know whether he was going to survive. There was always a threat of death in that first. He got pneumonia. They'd put a bolt in his head to check the pressure of the inside his brain, you know, the intracranial pressure, and that wasn't in quite correctly, and it wasn't measuring, so it was going up to 14 or 15, which they weren't worried about. That's perfectly okay. And then this neurosurgeon had come up and done a little tweak with it, and it was going up to 54, 55.
Whoa.
It was massive, and they were talking about brainstem injury and stuff. So we knew that. I've always been really interested in medical stuff, so I was sort of like,
you know the language.
I sort of knew the language, what was going on. And you know, we had at times where we've had to say goodbye to him, and thinking that he was going to die. You know, I can remember very clear the day that they were going to take him down. They didn't even know if they were going to get him to surgery. They had to take part of his skull out to give the brain room to swell. But on that day, so many miracles happened. We had, I worked in a Catholic school, and the priest had turned up just at that time. And
what was your job in the school?
I was a teaching support assistant. I used to work with children that just had just learning disabilities, you know, just needed a little bit of a hand up. But yeah, so the priest turned up, and he sort of spoke with me, and he prayed with Chris. And I sang to Chris before he went, and I used to sing to him, "You Are My Sunshine," and I sang that right the way through without any tears. And it just, like, all the nurses were in bits, but it was just that really intimate moment with him. And I just said to him, look, you know, I really want you to come back, but if you need to go, then go. I felt that I don't know, I just felt that very peaceful about what, you know, whatever was going to happen. Because I had absolutely no control. And that was really hard. But then he was in, you know, and then he came through that. They said to me that they were going to bring him out of the coma, and that's when it already started, really, because, you know, they said he's not in a coma anymore, but to me he looked like he still was. And it's that realization that he's not going to do that movie scene thing where they wake up and say, "Hello, Mum, what are you doing here?" It was very much, he just didn't do anything at all, really.
So it was almost like he died, but his body was still working. And, you know, I can hear from what you're saying that it was a miracle that he didn't die in that moment. And I'm guessing that people listening will wonder to themselves, if my own child was in that, was that ill, would I want them to live, or would I want them to die?
I didn't even consider that, whether, you know, I wanted him to live. I just wanted my, you know, I always called him my boy. I want my boy back. I wanted my boy back. And we had some very serious conversations with doctors. We had a doctor that used to come in. I used to call, I know it sounds awful now, but we used to call him Dr. Death, because I knew he wanted a conversation with me, and I knew that it wasn't going to be nice. And I used to hear him coming into the ward, because he used to have like a clippy shoes. And as he came towards the curtain, I used to nip out the other side. And it was very much, I know now looking back, that it was my brain trying to protect me. I didn't want to hear. I wasn't ready to hear anything that they were going to tell me. Because it was too painful. All I could focus on was getting Chris home and just getting him well. but yeah, you know, looking back, I
However
think, you know,
well, I interrupted you, but however well looks like, whatever well looks like, you wanted him home alive.
yeah, because I had no concept of how disabled he could be and what that would mean for us as a family.
And you look back at yourself now, at that you in 2003, and what would you say to her now?
I think it would be to just keep going. Just you're doing okay, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't change. I had to go through everything that I went through to get me to where I am today. And it's been a really difficult journey.
Oh my goodness, I can imagine.
We had a time, so he was so we did a lot of rehab with him in the hospital. The hospital's not very far from me, so I look after him all the time. When he was in hospital, I'd stay with him all day.
So you gave up your job immediately?
Yeah, I couldn't focus. I didn't give it up, actually. I was intending to go back initially because we really just didn't know what was going to happen. And so we had periods of, like, the nurses would tell me stories about other children that were like Chris and how they suddenly started, like, things started to click into place again. So I had this real sense of hope that he would still improve, that there would still be some improvement. And there were times when, like, it was my birthday when he was in hospital, and I'd heard a story about a young girl that on Mother's Day, her mum had come in and she'd spoken for the first time since her brain injury. And so I just thought this was going to happen for me. And, you know, so on my birthday, I kept going in the room and then leaving and then coming back in and leaving, waiting for him to say something. And it was devastating. No one else knew what I was doing. They probably think what she was in and out of the room for. But it was all these little things that I was just waiting and hoping.
Looking for signs,
Yeah. But I had a sense that he was there. Well, I had a sense that he was there, but he had absolutely no facial expressions whatsoever. His face was very flat.
And he has some now, doesn't he? You can see him better now.
Yes, yeah. So we got our first smile just before he left hospital, actually.
Wow.
I said something to him and he sort of turned to look at me and this smile came. Wow. And my mum and dad were there. At that time, my mum and dad had come back off holiday, and it was amazing. I just cried and everyone was crying because, you know, it was that first sign that he was definitely there and he heard what we were saying, because we had no clue before that. So, and then so whilst he was still in hospital, my middle brother, who'd had a lot of mental illness problems, he actually took his own life. So it was literally 6 months after Chris's accident that my brother took his own life.
Oh my goodness.
And it was that I had, like, in my head, I had Chris upstairs in the hospital, and downstairs I had my brother in the morgue. It was just such a horrible time.
And for your mum as well, for all of you.
I'd lost another brother a few years before that. When I was 23, my brother was 40, and he had actually taken his own life as well. So it was very much, you know, it was just one thing after, it seemed one thing after another.
Yeah, huge things. And I can't help wondering how come both of your brothers took their own lives and you somehow have survived and are kind of able to really live your life given such a devastating loss as Chris's accident. What do you think that is about? What do you think you have?
I think I have a great support team around me, but I do have a strong, I don't think I had a strong faith when I was younger, and I don't even really go to church now, but I have a real sense of a presence, and I have an absolute belief that whilst Chris was at death's door, that he had I said that he had gone and sat in the lap of God.
Oh wow. So it's like divine intervention.
When I can't explain how Chris is to other people, you have to see him really, but when you're around him, he has such an amazing presence and aura that even though he doesn't speak, he emits this energy of joy and love.
Wow.
And people just fall in love with him wherever he goes. It's amazing. And that was one of the things, you know, when he was in hospital, we didn't, I used to look at him, and you know, at this time he'd had his bone, his skull had been put back in, and his face was all swollen from surgery, and it was just really, he looked really sore, and it looked really he looked so sad. And I can remember looking at him and thinking, you know, I love you no matter what. You're my son, and I will always love you. But how will society accept you? How will other people take to you? You know, if you can't speak to them, if you can't do anything, what, you know, how are we going to get through this? And I just knew that, you know, I loved him no matter what, and that's all I could focus on. I thought, you know, whatever happens will be, you know. But as it is, he does, and he has an amazing sense of humor. For someone who can't communicate, I hear a lot of laughter. So
what's his position now? He's how old?
He's 32.
And he's 6 foot?
Yes, he's 6 foot. He never
living
lost
at
weight.
home. You're living at home. He's living at home.
Yeah. So we had to move. We were really fortunate in a sense that because Chris had an accident, we were able to claim compensation from the chap that knocked him over. I never ever held him accountable. I think, you know, with people that drive, we all know how quickly accidents can happen, and I never blamed him, and it felt very uncomfortable even thinking about compensation, but it was against his insurance company. I didn't feel that it was personal against the man himself that knocked him over. I mean, he was devastated. So we were very fortunate that we were able to get compensation. But initially, Chris went off to Tadworth for rehab, and that was really difficult. He'd been up the road from us. I've been able to see him every day, and all of a sudden he was in Surrey. I tried to go back to work. I was finding it very difficult to concentrate and deal with what, you know, just what the children needed from me, and I just didn't have it because I couldn't give them, you know, 100% whilst I was there. So I left work.
Your brain was always with Chris, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah, definitely. My brain was definitely there, and I used to just, like, sometimes I would say to my husband, I'm just going to pop out and get some bread or something, and the next thing I'm on the M25, and he says, you're back at Surrey, aren't you? I was like, yeah, and I'd just go, because I just wanted to see him. I felt okay as long as I could see Chris. As long as I could see that he was okay, then I felt okay. It was a, you know, I felt very connected to him, and I felt very much from the beginning that I was going to be his voice, and I had to speak for him.
So having him at home, how are you mentally and as a family, and your daughter, how are you now all these years later, decades later?
So I mean, I had quite a bit of therapy. I found the best thing that worked for me was EMDR because of the trauma. I found it whenever I drove past the place where Chris had his accident, even sort of 15 years later, I was still having that vision. Flashback. And it was still very much in my mind. So I had EMDR, and that really made such a difference to me. My daughter, she finds it very difficult.
I bet. Because she lost some of you, didn't she, when he had his accident, and her dad.
Yeah, it was very difficult trying to be mum to both. And I think the thing was that we just tried to keep everything as normal as possible for my daughter, which is impossible with the situation we was in. You know, she was she was actually in her last year at primary school when Chris had his accident. She was just sitting her SATs. So she sat them, and she did really well. But so not only was she transitioning to a secondary school, she was also, we were moving because we had to move. We couldn't get Chris into our house that we lived in. So we had to move. So we were moving away from her friends that she knew and everything that was familiar. So she went through all that as well. You know what I mean? For me, I was just very focused. Oh yeah, absolutely. She, you know, and she's found it very difficult. She finds it difficult to I think she's worried about relationships with people, because in her experience, obviously because of what happened to my brothers as well, she was very aware of it. And she's like, you know, what if I fall in love with people and they die? They're going to leave me. There's that sort of, and I have paid for her to see people, but it's very much her own journey now. My daughter's 30, so she was only 2 years younger than Chris when he has accident. And it's meant she finds it hard to trust. Yeah, she does. Yeah, she does. Because her belief system is informed by her experience. Yeah. And her experiences, you can wake up and have an ordinary day, go to school, and by the end of the day, there can be a catastrophic accident that completely turns mine and my family's life upside down, and that I have no control over that. No, and that's, it's a very profound, you know, she's gone from having a sibling that she could argue and fight with and share, you know, and talk about things with, and now he's not there anymore. Yeah. And so, you know, throughout that period of her being a teenager and stuff, we were very fortunate. We felt that she could have gone one way or the other. She could have gone down the route of getting into trouble and being very rebellious, but actually she was excellent. In fact, she was obviously overcompensating and didn't want to bring any trouble to our door and that sort of thing. So she, in a lot of ways, didn't go through a normal teenage years. You know, it was very different. And now, you know, she's got cousins that she's very close to, and they like brothers and sisters, and they go out together as brother and sister and friends, you know. And I think she's very aware, and I'm very aware, that she hasn't got that with her brother, you know. But it sounds like she determined to kind of go forward and make the best of what she had. I mean, I'm sure she's suffering and still is, but, you know, trying to make you can make your family as well as be born with the family that you have, can't you? And she's making brothers out of her cousins. Like, she's given what she has. She's absolutely doing the best she can. But what do you think? I mean, you've talked about a lot of different things. What do you think was the most challenging part of this experience, which has been going on for 19 years? I think it's been the amount of care that Chris needs has meant that, like me and my husband, we had Chris. I was 19 when I had Chris. Young man. And the expectation was at some point in his life, you know, they would get older and go off, and me and my husband would have a bit of life to ourselves. And, you know, we made the decision right from the very beginning that we wanted Chris to stay with us at home. We knew that he wasn't happy when he's away, you know, so we decided that we wanted to keep him home. But that has really impacted us. It's meant that our world has become very small. Care can be unreliable. So we do have care for Chris now at home. We have carers come in. We don't have living carers. We have carers come in. But we've been through periods like during the pandemic and stuff where care has been very unreliable. We've had people dropping off sick and all that sort of stuff. So we've had to pick that up. And it's just meant that our world, we don't really go out with friends. Sort of gradually your friends disappear. And it's not because they don't care. It's because their lives are moving on. And our life has stayed very much the same, you know. And Chris is a big young man. He's 32, and despite them saying that he would like lose a lot of weight and stuff, he never did. And he's always he's just a solid young man that, you know, that used to play rugby, and he's not, I think he's still built for it. You know. But, you know, but on the other hand, Chris has brought us a lot of joy. And, you know, we hear him with his carers, or, you know, we're down there with, we've just taken him away on holiday with us, and to hear him laughing, and just, you know, he has the best life. He goes out and about, and, you know, his life is very different from what we'd imagined it would be.
Of course.
But, you know, when you said in the very beginning about, you know, being able to engage without him speaking what's wrong with him, you know, Chris communicates so well. If he's not happy, you know it. They've chosen something for him, like they will give him choices of what he wants to watch on TV, and if they put on the wrong film, he will let you know. But if he's happy, on the other hand, you also know. So
you can really read his mood, which is an amazing
absolutely. And the carers know
gift.
him so well as well, to get to know him. Yeah.
And I can hear as you're talking, it's like you both kind of know that your life has been turned upside down, and that it isn't by any means the life you expected, but also you're in a kind of bubble that's completely attached to Chris, so that your choices and capacities are very, very limited. And I wonder, do you look at those friends who still really love you, but they are living those lives that you expected to have? Does that bring up, I mean, I think it would with me, a lot of resentment or anger or the unfairness of life? What are the difficult feelings that come up when you see people's sons the same age as Chris getting married, having kids, having their lives?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time being angry and resentful.
Yeah.
It felt very painful. In the early days, Chris's friends used to come and visit, and I loved the fact that they wanted to come and visit him, but it was so hard. I used to cry when they left. I couldn't. I used to try and avoid, and it used to make me feel bad, because I think, oh, they want to see Chris, but I can't bear that they're carrying on as normal, and I'm you know, where we're stuck with, you know, being in this place. And just seeing, you know, my niece has just had a baby, and it's the most wonderful thing. But knowing that Chris had, you know, I could imagine him with children and getting married, and
that whole future that you'd expected. It's such, when other people have it, it's so bittersweet, isn't it?
Yeah, and the level of his disability as well is that, you know, I joined, I tried going to like places that support people that have had brain injuries, and there was never anything for Chris. It was always very much that people had a brain injury, but they could maybe still communicate, they could still walk, maybe needed a bit of extra support. There was very, very few people that ended up so profoundly disabled as Chris. And so, you know, and Chris went to a special school. So when I'd go to the school, I can remember asking the head teacher, is there anyone here that's had a brain injury that like Chris? And she said no. She said, unfortunately, most children that are this profoundly disabled is from birth. Children like Chris that have had that sort of brain injury don't normally survive. And so I always felt like we were just, I couldn't connect with a support group in any way, because Chris seemed to be quite unique. And I know that there are other people out there that have had young people that have had brain injuries the same as Chris, but it's most either die or they, you know, they do make some sort of more progress than Chris has made.
And so given that you, at the kind of spectrum of devastating things that can happen, even in the kind of domain of brain injuries, that you're at the very bad end of it, what has helped you? How have you stopped yourself becoming resentful and furious, and or are you, you know, what has helped you manage all of this?
I think my husband, we did always communicate. And
you met so young, so you've been together since
we were good friends. We were friends before we became like partners. We used to play together. He lived over the back from me. So we've known each other for a lot of years, and we got together very young.
I can see you light up as you talk about him, even now, all these decades later.
Oh, he's just been amazing. He's a very calm. I was always very up and down, and he's very calm. Nothing really phases him. And he will let me just talk. So I can talk to him about my resentments without feeling. And it's not that I always had this thing of, I was resentful at other people that could carry on with their lives, but it's not that I didn't want them to not have that life. But it was the fact that I was going through it, and I didn't want to carry that. Sometimes the pain felt too much. It felt overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And the fact that no one else could see that pain, because to the outside world, everything was okay. Yeah. But inside, I can remember just looking out the window, and it's like, how can the world just carry on going the way that it is? And mine has just stopped. So, my husband, my daughter has been great. We talk about things, and I've got some amazing friends. It's about communicating. I find that if I talk about it, I'm not carrying that burden on my own.
Yeah. So once you voiced it and really connected and felt heard and haven't felt judged, something releases, something kind of opens you up, whether it's with your husband or your daughter or a friend, that somehow not holding that resentment inside, but voicing it and not judging it yourself kind of frees you then to feel a bit clearer.
Yeah.
So looking back on that, what have you learned?
What, since, from everything that's happened?
So people listening who maybe have a child with a disability, profound disabilities, or healthy lives, if they're listening to your story, what's something that you've learned that you think might be useful for them to know?
I think that it's good to let people know how you're feeling, to talk about things. People won't know if you're struggling unless you tell them, and that you might need a bit of help. That it's okay to have all those feelings of anger, resentment, questioning. I had to question whether we had made the right decision. If Chris would have wanted to make the decision, if he could have made the decision, would he have said, no, let me go? But I felt, looking back, it was out of my hands. And I do again, I say, I have a faith. I do believe that I'm being held and I'm being carried along the way.
And there's
I'm not on my own.
And there's something about that in some ways is liberating, isn't it? That when you surrender to a higher power, whatever that higher power is, and for you it's Catholic faith, it protects you from kind of self-attack in the way, because you're kind of putting your hands up and saying, I'm not in charge. I don't have control. This isn't my call whether my son should live or die. It's in the hands of a higher power, whatever that higher power is. And that in some way is releasing when you kind of paradoxically recognize what is within your gift and what isn't within your gift.
I think we had a lady come running up to us saying that we should pray for Chris, that he could be healed and all this,
Is that quite spooky and annoying?
It is, because actually I really believe that just because Chris is disabled doesn't mean he doesn't have value. And actually, if you believe in a higher power or a God or whatever, God doesn't make mistakes. We are all born, and we're all born different. And I don't know, it was an accident that Chris had. He had an accident. He made a decision to cross that road at that time, and he got hit by a car, and it was an accident. That wasn't, there wasn't any spite or malice in that. And
it was like one of those sliding door moments.
Yeah.
Like 1 second
he could have made
either
it.
side.
Yeah. And you know what? I've been given the strength on a daily basis to get through that, and to be able to, I've been very driven. I have been, I've always said that, I'm the mouthpiece for Chris, and it's a good job. I am quite chatty. But, and also one thing that I will say is that once you can get past that anger, I find that dealing with professionals, I've accomplished a lot more by being kind and gentle when I'm asking for stuff. There's always this illusion that you have to go in shouting and screaming to get what you want. And my experience has been that we have been really well cared for. Chris has been really well cared for. And a lot of that is because I think it's because of the kindness that comes out of this family.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You know, I want to help other people. I have spoken to other mums that are in the early days of going through this with their children. You know.
And in that reciprocity with healthcare professionals, I used to work in a pediatric unit supporting families when a child had profound injuries like yours, whether they were born with them or from an accident. And one of the big things I did was support them, but also how to communicate to families. And one of the big messages I kind of led with is that parents know their children best. And so if you can really listen to parents, you can use their knowledge and wisdom and combine it with your medical knowledge and wisdom, and then you can make a really good decision. It sounds like when you communicate really well, they hear you really well, and then Chris gets the best outcome.
I have encountered some difficult times in hospitals, not so much when he was a child, but once he became an adult, and he's gone and he had to go into intensive care. He'd been in an accident, actually. One of the carers the wheelchair tipped over, and it was so he ended up in intensive care, and there was some sort of degree of, well, we don't know whether he should be ventilated and all this sort of stuff. Basically, they were saying that they didn't feel that it was going to be viable, but actually another doctor that knows us really well said, look, Chris has a really good quality of life. If he has any chance, give it to him. And he did.
Oh, that sounds so moving.
Yeah, but I've made a scrapbook now of Chris and what he does and his life, because on Black and White, I mean, doctors see Chris at his very worst when he's really unwell and he's sleepy and he's whatever. They see him at his worst. They're not seeing him.
He's not very alive when they see him.
No, and so they read in Black and White, and it looks really bad. He's got quadriplegia, spasticity. He doesn't communicate.'s peg fed. He has all these complications, but actually, when he's well, he has a really good quality of life. He's out and about. He goes to see live bands. He goes to the theatre. He does all sorts of amazing things.
Amazing.
Whilst I sit at home worrying about him. And that's another big thing. It's an element of trust. I have to learn to trust. I used to do all of Chris's care in the early days, apart from his nights. Because he has a waking night carer. But it got to the stage where I knew that I wasn't enough for Chris. He needed a life outside.
And
he was fed up with Mum. Yes. Yeah, and now because we have care in, I can go down and visit him like a friend, like a mum would do. I'll go and visit him and just chat. We he lives in our house, but we have sort of like a little bit of separation. But it works well,
Incredible.
But I've always said that the doctors are experts in medical care, but I am Chris's expert.
Exactly. And the two working together, you get the best outcomes.
Absolutely.
So do you have a question for me, Claire?
I didn't think of anything that I could ask you. I know that you've spoken to so many families, and you take on their stories, and I've followed you for a long time, Julia, and I've read your books, and I love the way that you are gentle with the way that you speak to people and about people, and it's really given me tips on how I carry myself around people. It really has. I just think I love the way that you're very good at listening. And I didn't prepare anything for today because I thought Julia would just bring out what she needs. I trusted you with, to bring out what you needed from me. And I feel like I've just rambled on a bit, but
not at all. I think we've had so many really important aspects of your story. And I think one of the things that is so profound of what you're saying is that we all who don't have these, you know, devastating circumstances make assumptions about disability, about what life can be like. And I think you, like you say, walking down the street, nobody would know that you've got a 32-year-old son with profound disabilities living in your home, and that is the center of your life, but also that you've made it a life that is worthwhile and important and meaningful, whilst also suffering. I mean, it has by no means been without huge cost to all of you, including your daughter.
Yeah, it's, you know, Chris, because he's not just disabled, he's profoundly disabled. He's in a wheelchair that he has to have head supports, and so, you know, his wheelchair's big. Everything with Chris is big. He's not a little boy, you know. So, you know, family get-togethers, quite often we can't go, or only one of us can go because we can't get Chris in, and it feels we feel very excluded at times.
Yeah, that must be very excluding. Like you're somehow different. You're not, well, and you are, is the truth.
Yeah, and we've been invited to things. It's, oh, sorry, we haven't, the care's not turned up, we can't come. And, you know, and booking holidays, just going away on holiday, you know, it takes a mammoth effort. We've only been abroad, I think 3 times now since Chris had his accident.
Wow.
And that's in 19 years. And it's because of the reliable. I mean, I was in Mallorca and I got a phone call to say that the night staff wasn't going to be able to make it, and I'm like, well, I'm in Mallorca, what do you want me, you know? But it's that worry, you know, when I'm not with him, I'm worried. And obviously because we've had the pandemic, that was a really scary time, really worried about anything that, you know, anyone coming through the door was seen as a potential threat.
Because
really hard.
An infection for him could kill him, couldn't it? But
also
I lost my mum.
I lost my mum to COVID before the vaccination. So my mum got COVID. I got it from my mum, but luckily I'd already started to wear a mask when I went down to see Chris. So I was already using PPE, and everyone was, all the staff were. And they've been amazing. Chris has been kept safe. But yeah, so I lost my mum. So it was a very real thing to me of what could happen if Chris got COVID.
Yeah, that must have been an incredibly difficult time for you, because you couldn't go out and you know, carers getting COVID, so a lot was down to you, and then your mum dying.
Yeah,
and also that you got less money, didn't you? Got less compensation, or not compensation? I'll start again. Financially, did it affect you?
We're in a very fortunate position where we don't have a mortgage, and the compensation that we got enabled us to buy the house that we have, which meant that Chris could stay with us. The house that was provided for us initially through the council meant that we were literally in each other's pockets. We had one room that, you know, there wasn't even a separate room that we could go into unless we went to our bedroom. So that was never going to work. So we live in a house where Chris, like, we live in a bungalow, and Chris has the whole front of the bungalow. We call it his bachelor pad. So he has that, and we have the back of the house, so we have space, and we were able to isolate during COVID, whilst me and my husband had COVID, but Chris was safe. But again, there was another whole system of trying to care. Chris needed more support whilst I was trying to grieve for my mum as well, you know, so it was all, so that was another challenge that we could do another podcast on.
I don't think we'll go down there now, because
no, absolutely. But yeah, it's just, I think that people are more resilient than they realise. I think people have said to me, I don't know how you got through it. I could never do that. How, you know, you do. What else do? You can't walk away. Many a time I've just sat on the back doorstep and just cried, or, you know, gone to the woods and shouted, it's not fair, why us? It's, you know, why me? But why not me? What, you know, and it could happen to anyone, you know, be grateful that if it hasn't.
I think that is kind of a very profound kind of lasting message is that we are all more resilient than we think we are. And rather than railing against the bad things that happen to us, you know, saying why me, that why not you, but also allow yourself to sit on the doorstep and scream at the sky or whatever it is, and keep going. I think that's but also you smile a lot, so I guess your sense of humor has helped you a lot.
Yeah, and it's acceptance. I've come to a place where I've just accepted. I cannot change my situation, and the more I'm fighting to try and think it into a different way, it was just making me more and more angry and more sad, because I couldn't do anything. Yeah. So once I finally accepted, I couldn't change it by thinking about it or you know, so accepting it. And, you know, and I am in a place now where I accept that Chris is very vulnerable. He's a very vulnerable young man. And we face the fact that, you know, he potentially is going to die before us. So we just, every day is a blessing. Every day that we have him just is a blessing. And that's all I can do, is take one day at a time.
I mean, that's a lovely way to end, that every day is a blessing and take one day at a time. Thank you so much, Claire, for being a guest on my podcast, and lovely to meet you.
Thank you. So glad to meet you too, Julia.
There we are. Well done. You raised your eyes then.
I rambled. I just rambled a lot.
Is there something that you wanted to say that you haven't said?
No, I don't think so. I didn't want to prepare, because I thought I don't want to read from a script. I would just let you lead. So I just hope that you can take something from what I've said and use it.
We definitely can take a lot from all of what you said and use it. How was it doing it?
It was fine once I started talking. I'm really aware that I can talk when I talk about my life, because I have had a lot of trauma and a lot of tragedy in my life. And I'm aware that I can speak about it as a third person, like I'm talking about it, but it's not really my life. But it's afterwards when I go away, and, you know, and I have had periods, Julia, where I've sat and thought, how did we ever get through that? Yeah. You know, I don't see how, I don't think I'm not in any way amazing, but my friends be like, you are the most amazing person I know, and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like,
it's true. Well, there's truth in it.
You are an amazing person.
You really
I take that, and I'm really, you know, grateful that people can see that in me. But I'm very fortunate that I've got a really loving husband and a really lovely family around me that are supportive, and that's, you know, that's some of the biggest things. I couldn't imagine ever having to do this on my own, but I would do if I had to.
I can see there's a steely determination in there that's also on your side.
Oh, Julia, I'm so glad that we got to speak, and you know,
me too.
I hope that, you know, you can use some whatever it is that I've said.
I definitely will. I mean, I don't know if this is hard to hear or what, but my granddaughter was hit by a bus crossing the road.
Oh wow!
But she was okay.
Yeah.
It's those moments.
And moments like that when I used to see that in the news, and, like, you know, I'd watch Children's Hospital and stuff like that, and you'd see these people come in with the most horrendous injuries, and there was part of me, I'd say to my husband, you watch them walk out of here. And it wasn't nasty. I'm glad they did, but there's always that cruel. Why didn't Chris?
Yeah,
you know, that was always, it's never ever, I would never take away. I'm so glad when people don't get injured.
Yeah.
But it's always that, why didn't we get that? And, you know, and my faith was really challenged through that.
You say was, like, you don't have that now.
My concept of God has changed. My concept of God, I think I saw God a bit as a genie, that you'd make a wish and he granted it. And there was you know, I went to a church where everyone was, you got to pray. And so then I started thinking, well, why is my prayers not working? And all that, you know, and so I started seeing God as being a bit vindictive, actually. And now my life, I have I don't really I say God because that's what people understand, but I do call it a higher power. And I say it's my holy presence. I have a presence of God within me and around me. And, you know, and I think that's what's changed a lot. You know,
makes a big difference.
Yeah, I'm really aware that I'm really aware about talking about faith with people, because some people can be quite turned off by it. So I sort of tend to keep a lid on it a bit, but you know,
it does give you extra strength, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I used to have every morning when Chris was in intensive care, I used to go and see, because I was staying in intensive care with him. I was in a side unit, so that I was on hand if anything happened. So I used to say goodnight to him, go to bed. I'd just get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd go and see him, make sure that he was okay. And my ritual was always, I'd go down to the chapel, light a candle, and thank God for keeping him alive for another night. And then I'd go and get a cup of tea and sit outside. And every morning I did that for a month. You know, it was
That's a lovely thing.
Yeah.
Good ritual. That's a good ritual.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't that I didn't think that was keeping him alive. I just thank God that he was alive, because, you know, we've still got him and we're grateful.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire. Lovely to meet you. I'll let